I'm Ashley, I'm a sixth former at Ripley St Thomas, and I wanted to interview my nan because I wanted to get her side on historical events and hear all the personal stories.
I'm Abby and I'm studying psychology, and I found it interesting how Claire Ash's grandma's memory was because it links in with what we're doing at the moment.
I'm Georgia and I wanted to do my story because I wanted to listen to the stories of when Ashley's nana was our age and the difference between then and now.
I'm Amy and I really want to take part in the My Story project because I enjoy speaking to my grandparents about their stories, and listening to Ashley's grandma was really interesting.
Well, my name is Dorothy. I'm 84 years old, which means I was born in 1929.
What's your earliest memory of the family?
One of the things I remember about that time was helping my mother to do baking. And so I must have only been about 3 because I had to have a stool at the side of her, at the table. It was a white scrub table and she was doing pastry. And I said to her, "Where did I come from?" And she said, "From heaven." And so I said, "Well, where did you come from?" And she said, "Stoke," you know, and that sticks in my mind, you know. And really, that was quite logical, because to me, Stoke was heaven, because I went to see my granny and my mother's 4 sisters, and, you know, it was an enormous treat.
What do you remember about holidays as a child?
About holidays?
Yeah.
We didn't go into a posh hotel, we went into a boarding house. But in the factories, they had special weeks, they called Wakes weeks, and you know that certain weeks were Bradford and Leeds and certain weeks were Bolton and Manchester and that sort of thing, you see. And as far as I remember, you paid, the landlady made a Sunday dinner for everybody, and that was paid for. And a strange thing they used to charge, because I remember my mum talking about this, you paid so much for cruet. Cruet. That meant the salt and pepper and vinegar and sauce and things that they would put on the table. Other than that, the mothers took the food in and they cooked for us. Well, goodness knows how they did it when everybody was taking something different in, you know. Well, my father was very good, and we played cricket a lot. And I was as good as the boys. I could play cricket. And I always wanted my share, you know, to play. And when we played at home, I had to do all the fielding until just before we went in, and they let me have a go with the bat, you know, and that's brothers, you see. The boys always goaded me, "You daren't do that, and you daren't do that," you see, and I was stupid really. They led me into doing all sorts of things that I wouldn't have done. And I was walking 1 foot in front of the other on the wall of the canal, you know, and this was because the boys had dared me. They didn't do it, you know, it's stupid.
What places would you go to on holiday?
Blackpool was favourite, of course.
Right.
But I do remember going to Rill, and it was when we were on holiday in Rill that a telephone came through to the boarding house that we lived, and suddenly we packed up and went home. And we actually did go down to Stoke, and I used to play out in the street then. I knew the children there because we went often, and there was a hullabaloo in the street and shouts and screams, and the neighbours came out, and I had hold of this girl and I was banging her head against the wall because she said to me, "You're loony like your granddad." And she was saying, "What does she mean? What does she mean I'm not loony? What does she mean?" You know, and they pulled me off her because they'd had word that my grandfather had tried to commit suicide. I didn't know this. And he was a miner, and he'd been in the most terrible mining accident, and he was underground for quite a long time, a few days, and when they found them, there were 3 of them alive and all the others were dead, and it turned his mind, and he was never the same afterwards. And apparently he put his head in a gas oven, which I think was favourite in those days, you know. I couldn't understand this, but they'd obviously took him to an asylum and he never came out, you know.
What were your memories of the war?
It was Sunday morning, And I went to church at the Holy Trinity at Bonus End, if any of you know it. And you didn't play out on Sundays, you didn't play out, you were in your best clothes, you went for walks. And we came out of church, and there was a lady came out of one cottage, and she'd been in the house listening to the Jews. And she came out of the house, and she pulled a penny over her head. And she said, oh my God, she said, we're at war. She said, and I've got 3 lads. Well, I was 10 when the war started. My gran died early in the war, and that changed everything. The war changed everything. And I think that was the time when I came aware. I didn't just accept everything, I changed then. I sort of was conscious of myself as a person and what was happening. And I knew that this was something serious when Dunkirk did happen, because they were all brought to the southern ports, you know, they were bringing them across the channel and they were putting them on trains, and they sent them to seaside places. So a lot of them came to Morecambe, and the boarding houses had to send their guests home. They were emptied, and these poor men, I can remember them arriving at the Promenade station. They were in a terrible state, you know. They were upset, they were dirty, they were half-dressed, you know. To get them away from the ports, you see. And it was a terrible time, it really was. And I was just old enough to take that in.